This video is about the replace missing values operator. This operator deals with examples within an example set where attributes have missing values. It's very important to handle these because they can be a source of bias and inaccuracy in subsequent investigations. We'll cover details of the default and columns parameters. We'll also look at how to use the pre-processing model to apply to other example sets. So let's just look at the process. So focusing on the top two operators initially, this retrieves the labour negotiations data from the repository, and this simply is the replace missing values operator with default settings for the attribute filter type, default and columns parameters. Now in passing, I'm not going to go into any detail about the create view, attribute filter type, invert selection and include special attributes parameter settings because these are quite general, and there is a video called, appropriately enough, attribute filter type, which is available to give some more detail on that. Anyway, for now we'll just use all, and we will not select special attributes. This means all regular attributes will have some work done to them, and the work done is dictated by the settings for this parameter here, the default parameter, which is set to average. The columns parameter is blank, there's nothing in there for the moment. We'll fill that in later. So let's run this, bearing in mind that the output here, the original output, is going to be the first tab we see. So this is the data before processing, and the tab at the very back is the data after processing. Let's run this. So you can see that this is the original data. So let's look at some of these question marks. So these are missing values, and you can see there's a good selection. If we look at the statistics view, you can see that there are missing values as indicated by numbers in this column. Notice also that there are different types of attribute. There's an integer, there's a real, there's a nominal. It's quite important to bear that in mind because that does dictate how the values are filled in the replace missing values operator. Now let's look at let's pick a few values. It looks like this third row, this third example within the example set, has quite a few missing values. So for now we'll focus on the duration, the wage inc third and col age attributes. And what will happen is that these will get filled in with a value, and we'll work backwards to see how it did that. So first thing, let's look. Here are the missing values. If I click on the example set replace missing values tab here, you should see them change to be values as calculated by the replace missing values operator. So how does it do that? Let's go to the design view and let's look again. So we're setting average. So what that means is that the operator here, replace missing values, will simply look at the average for all values for each attribute and fill that in. And it will take account of the type of the attribute. For integers, it will round it to the nearest integer value. For reals, it will just use the average value. For nominals, it will use the most common, or mode. So that if we go to the data, we can actually see, by looking at the statistics view, what the statistics are for each of these attributes. So duration, so there's one missing value, its average for the non-missing ones is 2.1, and so I'm expecting to see the value 2 as the replaced missing value. Wage inc third, that's a real attribute. There are 28 of them. The average is 3.767. So whenever there's a missing value, that should get replaced with 3.767. And the final one is collage. This is a nominal. The most common value that this nominal has is the value none, N-O-N-E, a string N-O-N-E. So every time I see a missing value in the original, I'm expecting to see none in the replenished dataset, the dataset with the missing values replenished. So if we look at the data, here we are. So sure enough, 2. That was the missing. This was the missing row This was the row where the missing value for duration was. Similarly, wage inc third, that also was missing, and notice that every single other time there was a missing value, it's been filled in with the value 3.767, and collage, so that was none. So again, if we remember, these corresponded to missing values in the original data. So if we go back to the design view, what other options are available? So average is the default, but you can have others like none, which you might do if you don't want to do anything. I suppose you could do none. Minimum is clearly the minimum for the particular value of an attribute. Maximum's obvious. Average we've just seen. 0 you can do, and value you can do. 0, as its name implies, simply fills the value 0 in. Value just uses the value that you supply. So what this, I won't run it, but what this would do is now every time there's a missing value in the original input set, it will simply put the value 1 wherever it encounters a missing value. For now I'm going to put that back to average, and now we're going to look at the columns parameter. Now what I'm going to do is just pick a few things like, let's pick wage inc third, let's set that to be 0, let's add another entry, let's set duration to be minimum, and let's set collage to be a value. And if I apply that, now what's happened is I'm now applying the average to all attributes where there's a missing value, except for these where I'm overriding the default behavior, and for the last one, collage, I'm actually specifying a value. So if I run that, we look at the missing value. So now duration was set to minimum, wage inc third was always set to 0, collage was set to something where there were missing values. Okay. So the final thing we'll look at is the model that comes out of this replace missing values. So that this model is something that you can apply to other unseen data. So you may decide that the missing values, the rules that you've used to fill in missing values, you might need to apply that to as yet unseen data. Now there are certain risks and difficulties with that, because you can risk introducing bias from training data onto unseen test data. In other words, if the training data, if you're applying an average based on the training data to unseen data, then you are essentially putting a certain amount of predictive power into the average that you replace missing values with, potentially. Anyway, it's just an area to be careful of, but it's too much detail to cover in this video. For now, what we'll do is we'll apply this model using the apply model operator to the same data that we used to build the model in the first place. We'll have a quick look at the model itself, which is this output here, and what we're expecting is that the model, when it's applied to the new data, and will simply create exactly the same example set that the original replace missing values operator creates in the first place. So if I run that, sure enough, this was the example set with the replace missing values in. Now if I look at the apply model, you'll see it's exactly the same. I can't see any difference at all, which is what you would expect. And just for completeness, let's look at the value replenishment model. So what this is telling you is that the output from the replace missing values operator is in fact a model, and it knows about these attributes and the details of the transformations needed to missing values to create real values that you can then use are built into this model. So I'll just finish by just going back to the original data, and I'll toggle that between that and the replace missing values so you can see what happens.